Hey, thanks for tuning into my podcast. This is Big Head on the Block, hosted by me, Tim Henderson, aka Big Head. Hey, welcome to Big Head on the Block. Today's topic is SWAT, Special Weapons and Tactics. Today, I have retired Baton Rouge City Police Captain and former Violent Crimes Unit Commander Ricky Arnett here with me today. Rick, if you would, give us a little bio on you and tell us when you started, how long you were with the department, and then how long were you with SWAT?
Okay. I started with the department in 1987, and I did 3 years at 2nd District, and in 1990 I transferred to the Criminal Division, and I worked in burglary for 3 years. And during this time, we had a SWAT team that was part-time, and there were two teams, an Alpha and Bravo team. And I was really interested in the SWAT work. It had a lot to do with firearms training, and I was into shooting at the time. So I joined SWAT in the early 90s, and I worked I worked my full-time job as a burglary detective. Then I went in interdiction, and I worked in interdiction until 2000. And that was on the highway. We had a lot of fun. Then in 2000, I transferred to the firearms training unit, thinking that I would get to shoot more and have more fun.
But that's when I first remember who you were. I think that was when I first met you, was in 2000. I remember going to the pistol range and listening to you some of your instruction, and I was really impressed with you and your dialogue and your knowledge.
That was an interesting run. I had a good time there. I learned a lot. But the thing that we brought to the table, we brought the training from SWAT, and we tried to apply it across the board. And I think we went a long way with firearms training then.
So basically, you just an all-around super cop. You've done you've done some of everything, including the time where I worked under you when you were the Violent Crimes Unit Commander. I was really impressed with the way that you managed the whole division and the way that everybody came together and worked as a unit, and we were pretty successful back then.
I had the yearning to be a policeman again. You know, I'd been a teacher. I'd found myself in training at the firearms training unit, and that encompassed academies and in-services. But deep down inside, I wanted to be a policeman again. So the hurricane came, Katrina, and we activated SWAT. The mayor did an awesome job, but he activated SWAT to try to hold down the conflict between the 504 guys from New Orleans and Baton Rouge. So when he activated that, I got to get out. I actually rode with John O'Donoghue and learn how to be a policeman again. And it was so much fun. I went to the chief, LaDuff at the time, and I just said, man, let me go back. Let me go back and be a policeman. You know, I'll do whatever you want. And I did. We made deals, and I kept some training up for the department, but I went back, and I went from where I came. I went back to narcotics, and I worked as a sergeant there in the narcotics division, and I stayed in there until I made lieutenant. And once I made lieutenant, I was transferred to homicide, which, you know, I didn't even know how to put the tape up on homicide. but I'll tell you what, I knew a lot of folks that were on the board, you know, the people who were murdered. So we just put a few little plans together, and like you said, we were very successful. After I left homicide, I was transferred back to narcotics, and I ran narcotics for a short while, and then I was put over the Violent Crimes Unit, and that was an every minute of everyday job. It was really stressful, but if you wanted to succeed, then you really had to put time in.
Yeah, that's one thing I noticed about you whenever I first went into the division. I was in the crime strategy unit assigned under you at the Violent Crime Unit, and your preparation was much more detailed than anybody I had ever personally seen. And, you know, my function, typically, I'm just a street cop basically at heart, but I really did enjoy the investigative aspect of being in that division. And for our listeners who are not police, when you refer to the mayor activating the police, I think it was Kip Holden at the time.
Yeah, Kip Holden did so much for us.
Tell them what it means when a SWAT team gets activated. Tell them, are you all the regular police then are deployed as SWAT, and that's all they do? That's their only function for this time y'all are deployed? Is that accurate?
Well, let me back you up a bit and kind of give you the history of from where we came. And back in the early 90s, when I joined a team, we had two teams. You had to have two teams to cover all the call. You couldn't be on call all the time. Unfortunately, some of the folks were. The snipers were on call all the time. But we had two teams, an Alpha and a Bravo team. And man, we were short on equipment. We had 4 MP5s, 2 for each team. That's a little submachine gun. And we had 2 Macmillan Harris sniper rifles, 2 for each team. And everyone else carried pistols. And we had very little gear.
So for the civilians listening, the sniper rifle, what kind of range is that? Use football fields maybe as an example that they would know, 100-yard football field. How far could you make an accurate shot, say in a hostage situation where you only had 2 or 3 feet of open space to make a shot?
Well, if you're on a range shooting targets, those rifles are good out to 1,000 yards.
1,000 yards.
But in a sniper situation in the arena, in actuality, I think the average shot in police work's about 80 yards.
80 yards.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you prepared. We did a lot of practice and prepared for 300 yards in, but most of our work was done at about 100 yards.
All right. Well, let's transition to SWAT, Special Weapons and Tactics. Baton Rouge City Police has their own acronym, and nationally, a lot of people, a lot of departments have their own acronym. So tell us what Baton Rouge uses instead of SWAT, and all these, even though they're not called SWAT, they basically are a function of a SWAT team, which is what most people refer to as tactical people, correct?
Right. They're tactical teams. They originated back in Los Angeles in the late 60s and early 70s. They had a lot of guys from Vietnam that were policemen, and they had to watch riots and all kind of armed robberies and terrorist organizations. So they established Gates from Los Angeles established the first SWAT team, and everybody across the country fell in place. And there were actually 2 theories that you would laugh that Los Angeles would talk for days, and the guys on the East Coast would shoot quickly. And we tried to be somewhere in the middle. There's a line where you draw the line, but you do everything you can to resolve things peacefully. But we came so far. Kip Holden, I'll tell you a quick story. There was a guy named Ricky Fugler that shot a policeman, and we loaded up in the back of a pickup truck to go arrest him. And we had very little equipment at the time. So once Mayor Holden got in place, he made sure everybody had AR-15s. That's a common thing to have a long gun, something that would go through body armor. And he even got us a Bearcat, which is an armored vehicle. And
which for the civilian people, the Bearcat doesn't have the ability. It's not like a tank, but you can have a gunner up top with a turret, right?
Yes, you can port it. Now, having the thing, we've learned from our own weapons that they're not invincible. They're a good handy tool, but they have limitations. But anyway, the mayor gave us just loads and loads of equipment. And then what really changed BRPD, we call ourselves a special response team. SWAT kind of got ugly. Some liberal people thought that SWAT was kind of harsh. So everyone renamed their teams, their SWAT teams, period.
And what era was that? 90s, 2000s? Or
yeah, it was in the 90s. We were called the Special Response Team, Baton Rouge Police Special Response Team. But I'll tell you what really changed Baton Rouge Police SWAT was Greg Ferries. Chief Ferries worked at a program called ATAP, and it's a bunch of retired military folks and policemen that would train policemen from other countries. And it was back at the state police compound. But he found there the resources. There were SEALs and Delta operators and Marine Force recon guys. All these special forces guys were out there teaching. So Chief Ferries brought 3 of them onto our SWAT team. And initially, I'm like, who are these dudes? They hadn't paid their price. What are they doing up in our line? But real quickly, we learned that these guys, they were it. And not only were they it, but they were there to share it. They were there to make sure that we were as well trained as we could.
One of them, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, was former Delta operative, right?
Yes.
And funny story about him is I was so intrigued by this guy that I volunteered for classes that he put on. And the only certificate that I've ever framed is the one when I went to one of his advanced handgun classes. He actually wrote a book, and I can't remember the name of the book. It was a short novel, and it was pretty intriguing.
His name is Kit Cessna, and Kit stayed with us a long time, and he transformed our SWAT team. He brought with us, I'll tell you, recently I read Eric Haney's book, Inside Delta Force. And as I'm reading the book, I'm there. Everything that this guy's going through in training, like the first thing that they did was they got their shooting up. Everyone was way above par on their shooting. So Kit came in, and we were all good shooters, but we went to another level of shooting. And then once we got that step accomplished, we went into training, and the training is so simple. The training is based on simplicity. And what it gave for us, it gave us consistency. You had the same training. Everybody knew, in a short while, everyone knew what the other person was doing. And then over the years, I'll tell you, BRPD SWAT was an old team. Many of us were in our 40s together, and we've been together for a long time. So there was a great degree of deal of trust. And in the operation itself, you knew what the other guy was going to do. You didn't even have to talk.
Well, I was going to ask this question a little bit later, but because you brought that up, let's talk about teams. How many teams typically does a department have? Because Baton Rouge City Police has multiple teams. So how many? Let's just focus on BRPD. How many teams do you think they have?
BRPD has two teams, an Alpha and a Bravo team, and or they had when I was there. I'm not sure what they have now, but we had two teams, and each team had its command structure. It was led by the entire team was led by an incident commander, and then the individual teams had a tactical commander, and then the entry element had its team leader, an assistant team leader, and then the operators. And each team had attachments. There were snipers attached to the teams, and they had their own training. Everybody had their training, and if you look back at how much you can ask, well, how much training did you do? You might say, well, I did a couple of days a month. But in reality, you trained all the time. And I'll elaborate on that in a moment. But going back to the makeup of the team, I'll tell you the greatest asset the teams of Baton Rouge had were the negotiators. We had two teams of negotiators that were as good as any in the country. And they kept us out of trouble so many times, just with good results and good negotiations.
I found that Baton Rouge in general, when I took the job in 1996, I had worked for East Baton Rouge Sheriff Department and LSU Police, and I quickly understood the team environment of the whole department in general, but I also noticed that there was a lot of competitive teams. We had K-9 divisions that competed and did well. We had motor division that competed and did well as looked pretty. We had, SWAT competitions and everything. So Baton Rouge was always good about representing, and I think that's why nationally we had such a good reputation. I think people all over the country respected Baton Rouge City Police when we went to, different seminars and stuff in other cities. Would you agree?
Yeah, we were very successful in the SWAT competitions. They were a fun thing for us, kind of like, hey guys, you put in all this work here, you can go participate in these events. And there was state competitions, and look, it came back tenfold, meeting these guys and getting to know these other guys. We all became family, and when we needed them, Tim, they were there. I'll tell you that. When we needed the help, they were coming from all over the state, and we got it. And I think a lot of that had to do with the relationships that we had formed during those competitions. And in Texas, the guy that trains a lot of them is Paul Howell. And Paul's a Delta operator, a former Delta operator. He and Kit, teach the same thing. So we're on the same page with a lot of these guys that we compete with. And we've been together for a very long time.
When you talk about other agencies, when our officers were tragically killed on Airline Highway several years ago, I had the privilege of driving around later that evening, and somebody from McDonald's donated 500 quarter pounders with cheese. I drove around and made sure everybody that was out there had something to eat, and we gave them some chips and a drink also. And I was totally amazed at the sheer volume of SWAT teams that were deployed. And I don't know where all of them were from, but if we have that many SWAT teams in Louisiana, it's very impressive. I'm guessing some may have came from surrounding states if we need it. Maybe you can touch on that just briefly. Do you think they were all Louisiana-based SWAT teams?
Yes, I think they were. I think we had some federal friends that were there, and they may have come, the federal guys were certainly a part of it, and they may have come from other places, but the teams that came to assist the sheriff's offices and police departments were in state. And man, I'll tell you, the first night of the riots, and that's another story, and I'll try not to get on it, but I called, with the chief's permission, I called Sheriff Ward, and I said, man, can you send us some help? I think we're going to need some help. We're not doing too well. We're making it, but we could really use some help. And he called me back, and he said, look, give me a few minutes. And he called me back, and he said, look, I'm coming. I'm bringing you a team. And I just talked to Jeff Wiley, and Sheriff Wiley's going to bring you a team too. So
he's always been a very valuable asset. I was the chief of police in Killian, Louisiana, which is in his parish. I reached out to him several times for help, and he was more than happy to provide either information or any assistance we needed. So I can believe that he was more than happy to come help.
Yeah, he had helped us before. In Hurricane Katrina, we had worked a lot of hours, and we called on him, and he sent us a team over to help us then. But in this event, not only did he come and Sheriff Wiley, they brought their teams, but they activated the Sheriff's Association. And man, I started getting pages, like guys from Washita Parish, guys we had competed against, guys from Hammond, would say, hey man, we're here for you. Just let us know.
People don't take into consideration the relationships. A lot of young cops that aren't exposed to other agencies because they're in uniform patrol and they're kind of limited in their scope. Whenever you have the ability, like when I was in the intelligence division, I made relationships with many other agencies throughout the state and throughout the country. And from time to time, I'll touch base with them. But it's an important element to have people that you can call upon anywhere.
Absolutely.
To come help you.
Yep.
Let's go into a topic. We kind of touched on it a little bit, but if uniform patrol, we're going to make an example here. This is hypothetical.
All right.
Uniform patrol has a bank robbery in progress. They're there, secure the scene. There's 2 bank robbers in the bank. The SWAT elements that are out and about, the ones that were in uniform patrol that weren't full-time SWAT, they would start descending upon the area. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. That's a long answer. I can give you a long answer, and I'll back you up a little bit to training. When Kit came in and started, and it's probably even before that, our team here, when I got on, there were some Vietnam veterans that ran it, just like the others, across the country. And then as it matured and, we got older, and Kit came in, our training went up a lot. It was intense and demanding, and a lot of people wouldn't think it's fun. It's a lot of work that went into that. But I said before, you might look on paper and you say, well, these guys train for 2 days a month. And then the snipers, they train for a couple days a month. But in reality, they train all the time. Like you were mentioning, the training that Kit brought, we train people to be leaders. We train people to train. Right. Everyone on the SWAT team, you would rotate. Like we would pick somebody, say, hey, Tim, next training, you're in charge. And we're going to do, say, building entries. So you're in charge of it. So we were building.
So the focus was not only to train, but to
lead.
Teach people how to be in a leadership position.
Absolutely.
Regardless of their rank.
Yep.
So uniform patrol has the bank surrounded. We know what's occurring inside. The SWAT elements typically, and I was in uniform patrol for a lot of my career, they would descend upon the area, and at that time, yes or no, they would assume tactical command regardless of who
right.
was in charge.
Right.
whether it be a lieutenant or a sergeant in uniform patrol?
Well, it was done respectfully, but yes, transfer of power went to the first SWAT guy on the scene. He was in charge of the scene at that point.
So even if he was the most junior officer and he's only been on SWAT for 6 months.
Right.
Right. And that just kind of, touches on the amount of training that y'all did. Me as a sergeant and lieutenant in uniform patrol, I utilize full-time and the SWAT guys in situations like that. Never had a problem. Never let egos get in the way. I didn't care. Once a tactical guy got there, I understood that they had the formal training, and it was imperative for me to not let my ego get in the way of saying, hey, 3-year guy, you've only been on SWAT for 6 months. I've been here 25 years, but take command. So, as long,
right.
I think, egos should never come into play in those situations.
I'll tell you what we emphasized. We emphasized as a SWAT officer, you're a policeman above everything else. And if you kept that in focus, all these transitions of power were nothing, because we're policemen. And that we talk that a lot. Above everything, we're policemen, just like the patrolman answering the call, just like the detective working the homicide. We are cops above everything else.
And to be clear, a lot of them are part-time SWAT, but they're in uniform patrol. So they'll have their gear with them to respond rapidly, where it might take actual team that's on calls per se. It may take them
an hour
to get there, but typically you'll have 3 or 4 SWAT guys or SRT guys in Baton Rouge that are able to respond quickly to the scene. So I think, that particular structure is, the way y'all had it structured is really good component to assist uniform patrol in situations that they may not have a lot of experience with.
Well, Tim, going back to training, we did have and do have guys who are assigned to patrol, and those guys have been taught within the SRT to be leaders. So when they're out, a lot of them will go out on their own at night and get some ambitious guys on their shifts and go practice building searches. And even more importantly, this is key. Many of the people in training at our training academy right now, Jeff Williams runs our training academy. He's one of the SWAT commanders right now. And our firearms training unit, those have always been SWAT guys who are interjecting training to the whole department. So a lot of our training is you're probably very fundamentally sound in your building searches, and it's probably really close to what we do, because that's what we teach from the academies on up through the in-services. We basically teach what we do and how you can do better to help us before we get there. I recall an active shooter at the Baton Rouge General, and it gives you an example of how you can take a SWAT guy, and it usually happens when SWAT guys are good at organizing manpower. So I got there early, and I think I was the first SWAT guy there. So when I went in the emergency room, we had to search this hospital. And there were a lot of eager uniform guys in there willing to do. And the first person I asked to do something, I asked Josh Ellis to go around the building. Go around the building and make sure there's a policeman at every exit. Then I took the uniform guys and they did the SWAT work. I just kind of rode in the middle and kind of directed traffic, but they did all the searching. And maybe about halfway in through it, we got some EBR guys that came up and they participated. They were some of their SWAT guys. And then some of our SWAT guys got in, and we ended up basically searching the whole hospital. And it was just a great example of how, when a SWAT guy gets there, you organize the personnel that you have, especially on an active shooter.
And I think most people in uniform that are in a command position, they understand that, these guys are trained. And like you said, the structure that they have, the training that they have, and the ability to organize the scene and bring some continuity to it is very impressive. Let's talk about, since you said there's an Alpha and Bravo team, I'm sure there's smaller elements involved. If 5 guys show up that are on Alpha team and 3 guys show up that are on Bravo team, are they able to be an effective team? Have y'all, referring to Baton Rouge City Police, and I'm sure everybody else is pretty consistent nationally. So if you just have 8 random, 5 from one team and 3 from another, and they all show up, will they be able to do a entry or whatever and be the same element as a unit as if they had their own people with them?
Right. Yes, we all train together. On training days, we're a big team. We break up into smaller units and do whatever the task at hand is that day, but we all do the same thing. And I'll tell you, going back to being on call, you couldn't be on call all the time. I'll tell you, it takes a toll on your family life. Say a wedding or a vacation or something, when you're on call, the way to get to those events is you get guys on the other team and say, hey man, I got a wedding this weekend. Can you cover my call? So it's really not unusual for somebody on the other team to be there, on a call out. We're just a bunch of guys that are a team. Now the Alpha and Bravo comes in basically when you're assigning dates to be responsible for call out.
Okay.
Alpha it's 2 weeks at a time. But if you had something to do during the 2 weeks you were on call, I'd call J.D. Leach and I'd say, hey man, I got something planned. Can you cover for me? And he would do the same. And it was a great working relationship. You
talk about the commitment. It brings up a funny story. Probably 2 or 3 years ago, New Year's Eve, an event occurred. It started around 2 in the afternoon, and I had a warrant for a shooter. He wound up barricading himself in a house with 5 kids. I don't know the outcome of the case. I won't get too involved in it, but it was around 9:30, and I knew one of the snipers. I was told by another team member that he was out here with his sniper rifle and doing his SRT thing, but he had $100 tickets to some New Year's Eve ball. And when I walked past him, he just cracked a joke. He said, "Big Head, what you doing working on New Year's Eve?" And I basically said, this started at 2:00. I'm not taking all the credit for it. We got to give this guy some credit for the ignorance that he's displaying. Eventually, it probably came to a conclusion. They made entry in within the next 30 minutes or so. But back to commitment and back to family issues, this guy already had tickets, but he knew that BRPD needed him, and he came out. So kudos to the SRT guys that do miss a lot of time with their families.
Tim, in the beginning, you get on the team because it's something that you've seen. You may not know everything involved, but you say, hey, I want to be that guy. But once you're on the team, it's about that guy. It's about the guy next to you and the team that you're on. It becomes about them more so than anything else. It's the team concept and the respect and devotion you have for those other team members.
That kind of reminds me of a scene from Black Hawk Down when Hoot was talking to Sergeant Eversman. It kind of talks about the team concept. And for our viewers, I'll play you the clip real quick. If you don't know Black Hawk Down, you should watch the movie.
When I go home, people ask me, hey, Hoot, why do you do it, man? Why? You some kind of war junkie? I won't say a goddamn word. Why? They won't understand. They won't understand why we do it. They won't understand it's about the men next to you. And that's it. That's all it is.
Now that our listeners got to hear that quote, let me ask you a question. Planned versus unplanned events. Is there a lot of different strategies involved with an unknown and a known operation?
Yes. The more time we have to prepare, I think the better we're going to perform. We train and train and train for that event in which there's no time to prepare. And those do happen. But for the most part, our duties include high-risk warrants. We learn, Tim, from our mistakes. Or not necessarily our mistakes. We learn from paying prices. And I'll give you an example. In 2005, Terry Melanson was killed. And as a result, we made ourselves better as a result of that shooting. He was doing an entry, and he was shot and killed. We created a risk assessment as a result. And in that risk assessment, there are a lot of criteria that go into it. And these are things that when you have time to plan. Say if it's going to be a narcotics warrant, you know, we want to know as much information on the bad guy. And every time we get something like he's committed a crime with a gun, you know, he gets points. And once there's a certain level of points, then SWAT has to run that warrant. You know, they're obligated by policy to run that warrant. You know, the policies set what SWAT does in motion. You know, like, for example, they're responsible for dignitary protection. You know, if a dignitary, if a president or vice president or somebody comes in, it's our responsibility to protect this person while we're here. So that's one of the, hey, we've got plenty of time to plan, and this is what we're going to do. On the narcotics warrants, you know, I'll go back, Tim. I think when I first got on, we were doing, you know, a few missions a year. You know, something bad would happen and we would get dispatched out, and, you know, we trained a lot, but we didn't get called out a lot. But I recall one year we did more than 250 warrants. You know, that's just like every day, man, you're doing something.
That's a lot of
work. Yeah.
A lot of warrants.
Yep.
But answer me this, at the same time y'all were doing these, obviously y'all were activated, but you were still responsible for your regular duty in between, right? Yeah,
but the SWAT call-outs were the priority over our regular duties. If you were activated, like after Katrina, we kept a full-time team, and they did most of this work. But if they were short, they would call somebody who, if someone was working that day, they'd call them, and that call-out was the priority of the day. You know, it took precedence over answering calls or, you know, whatever you did. And
right.
there were, like, sometimes if you were a homicide detective, you know, you would have to stick with that homicide. But if we could pull you and keep you in that SWAT arena, we had a lot of success doing that. We had a lot of support, you know, from the administration.
So the people that supported SWAT or that was active members of SWAT, you had K-9?
Yes.
Officers?
Right.
You had negotiators? You had medics from EMS, right?
Yes. And that was, again, that's one of those things where if you have an opportunity, if you have just enough time to prepare, you had these people come and play. You know, it's great to have an EMS tactical medic there with you, knowing that, hey, they're right around the corner. You know, if something happens, we call them in, and we're in a better position. So they were there. Just about every time we had an opportunity to pre-plan an event, they came.
Yeah, I the first time I saw one, I was confused. I'm like, who are you? And he told me he was an EMS medic. It's been many, many years ago, but I thought that was pretty intriguing.
Yeah, they were awesome.
The other components, you'll have different types of explosives. Y'all have flashbangs and explosives for breaching, correct?
Yes. Yeah, we have an EOD officer assigned to us, an explosive expert, and they can make an explosive breach, but we weigh the cost. You know, if you put explosives on a door and blow a door, there are going to be particles of that door going everywhere. So it would be a very rare circumstance for us to use an explosive breach. It's kind of like, Tim, now, I think the NTO, the National Tactical Officers Association, they came out and spoke against a no-knock warrant. Man, there are times when no-knock warrants are in play. You know, if you've got say a cop killer, and he's held up in a house and you know he's in there, you don't want to go out there and inform him that you're there and you're about to make entry. You know that he's going to shoot. You know, he's got nothing to lose. So there's absolutely a place for no-knock warrants. And the same thing goes with that explosive breach. But that explosive breach is so dangerous that it would have to be a very unique circumstance for us to use an explosive breach.
So recently, Baton Rouge Council, I believe, and I don't really want to get into the political world here, but they were making some type of assessment about damages to people's house when SRT were making entries. And my thing is this: why should the police be responsible for damage that occurred when they're actually trying to eradicate a particular offender from an area that may need that amount of force used?
Again, that's a political issue. SWAT, when they make an entry, a dynamic entry, they're going to cause damage. You know, even if it's just with a mechanical ram, they're going to bust the lock off the door, and there's going to be some damage to the frame of the door itself. that happens often. Or windows. Sometimes we'll rake windows and insert flashbangs. You know, you look at the threat assessment and see what the threat's going to be to the officers, and then you determine, you know, what method of entry we're going to make. And the flashbangs are just a tool that we can use to give us an extra second or an edge to get in to contact this dangerous person.
And
but it's damaging to the property.
Just for the record, I believe in no-knock warrants in many circumstances, and the tactical guys need to make those decisions, not the politicians. I understand the reason to have a regular warrant where you have a knock warrant, you identify yourself, but that can't happen in all circumstances, like you said, because people die. If an offender is known and he has a propensity for violence and he has really nothing to lose. So I think you raised some good points there. I have a question for you. I spent probably 15 or more years in uniform patrol, somewhere in that era. My question to you is this. SWAT receives hazardous duty pay, correct?
Right.
Okay. As a UP guy, I always had an issue with them receiving hazardous duty pay and not uniform patrol. And let me explain my reasoning behind that. Everything that uniform patrol officers do is based on unknown variables. They have no pre-planning, no pre-staging, no anything. They dynamically respond to calls. Many times SWAT officers have the ability to pre-plan events. So for all those in uniform patrol, give us a reason and a mindset why you think SWAT should be given hazard duty pay and not the soldiers out there on patrol.
Well, I agree with you that and so do statistics. The guy on patrol is more likely to be injured than the SWAT guy. You know, look, we're very well trained, very well equipped, and statistically, when SWAT is called, there's much less injury to the violator and to the officers than the initial uniform patrol responses. The uniform patrol guys are in like you said, they don't know what they're getting into, and statistics show that they're hurt and injured more than the SWAT guys. So I agree with that. I think to answer your question, I think if you knew what that SWAT guy did to be on SWAT, the sacrifices that guy made, I think you would go along with, hey man, this little bit of change that you get a month, it really isn't worth it. And again, it goes back to you're not there for the little bit of change. You're there for the guys that you're working with and you enjoy the job. But there's so much involved in being a part of SWAT that they certainly could use the extra money. Well,
I didn't think that I could be convinced, but you gave some good valid points. So I will say you've changed my mind in that aspect. That's you use some good reasoning. One other thing I want to talk about is you as a sniper with the Baton Rouge Police SRT unit. Give me a little, or give our listeners a little understanding of what it takes to be a sniper, the training involved, and the practice involved after you've been certified. And where do you certify? Well,
the first thing you do is you become an SRT member. That's the hardest thing. And once you get on the team, and I'll tell you, Tim, we didn't finish talking about what you had to do to get on the team. The most important thing, you get through the shooting, you get through the physical fitness, but there are interviews. And man, I'll tell you, I like the guy who works hard. When we have our interviews, we do background checks. We want to make sure this person's not out there violating people. We want to, we want a good internal affairs record. But more importantly for me, I like that guy that worked. If I go say, hey man, tell me about Tim Henderson, and they say, man, that's a workhorse. That's what I want, because I can train you to do these other things, but I can't make a workhorse out of a lazy person. So I was all about that.
They have to be self-motivated, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. And being a part of this team, not only you're trying to make the team better, you're trying to make the department better. You're always sharing throughout the department, in whatever capacity you're in, you're sharing what you've learned from SWAT. You become a leader. Now, back to what I had to do to become a sniper, once you got on the team and a position became available with the snipers, there are four, two for each team. And one, you had to go out and practice. You had to get to where you were really, really good with that rifle. And I'm telling you, Tim, it was always, we were competitive. You know, we'd come out on qualification days and we're all competing against each other, but it was nothing to shoot a hole at 100 yards and then turn around and try to shoot that same hole and hit it. You know, in fact, that's what's expected of you, that degree of accuracy. Now, to get there, they sent me to a school that the Army put on. It was a joint venture with some guys from South Carolina, I think. It was White Feather was the school. But the Army guys came in, and I'll tell you, it was stressful because if at any point you put a Q on there for qualification and you missed a round, you went home. You know, there was no do-over. They sent you home. And if you had a practice on there, you know, you could squeeze off a bad round. But the stress came, it is self-initiated stress. It came from within. And that built the character you needed when you were deployed.
And most people don't realize that most cops are very competitive about everything in
absolutely
in the police realm, I guess is the easiest way to describe it.
Yeah, we were always talking smack with those guns. Those are very, very accurate guns. We use Terry Cross guns right now, and that's the most accurate rifle I've ever shot.
So after you made it through the school, just your level of training, you don't have to talk about everybody else. How often did you practice? Not the 2 times a month that you had to practice, but how often would you practice yourself weekly, say?
Well, I like to shoot, so I would try to shoot once a week.
Okay.
Now we did get together. The snipers would get together and shoot as a group a couple of times a month. And they there again, they had a qualification course. You know, that's something that we going around the country and competing. We came back and we built our own. We established our own qualification course, and it was a pretty challenging course.
So how often did you come out on top?
I try to come out on top every time. I think I did most of the time. I'd have to argue with Scotty and some of the other guys.
That's okay. Look, they're not here for the podcast, so
right. If they were here, I'd have to retract that.
We'll take your word that you won most of the time.
Yeah.
Well, look, it's been very interesting and intriguing, and I really appreciate you coming. And I think our listeners, both police and civilians, will get a lot out of this. Give me one story out of all your 30, how many year career?
I was there for 24 years. I was on the department 31, but
31 years.
I was 24 on SWAT.
Give me one thing that pops out in your mind that's an intriguing story that our listeners, especially the civilian listeners, would like to hear.
All right, I'm going to have to give you 2 because I was laughing inside. I was laughing at one when we were talking about the damage to houses. We went down south one day and we hooked the Bearcat. We were having a door that we had to pull open outward, and we weren't able because of the reinforcements. We knew we couldn't beat that door inward. So we hooked up the Bearcat to this door, and we jumped up there and we were ready to make entry. You know, the door's going to come flying off and we're going to go in. Well, the whole front of the house came off. And we were jumping off that thing like a ship, you know, a sinking ship. We were trying to get out of the way of this wall, and it comes crashing down, and the dude's sitting in his chair just like you're sitting now. That's what we had.
That's a funny one, and luckily for me, I was able to experience that because I was working in the South at that time, and when I saw that, I was like, man, that's not, cops aren't easily impressed, but I was very impressed at seeing that vision, man.
We were shocked, I'll tell you, as we were abandoning the ship. I'll tell you what comes to mind is actually my last command as a SWAT commander. And everything that we've talked about, the training, the camaraderie, the equipment, you know, everything came into play this day. But it was at the Be Quick, and unfortunately, we didn't respond. You know, you can what if it. You know, what if we had gone to the Be Quick in our Bearcat? You know, that day, what might have changed? But you know, you can't go back. It's water under a bridge, and we accept that. But as soon as we arrived, we engaged Gavin Long and a couple of the guys. In fact, one of the guys was behind the Be Quick sign, and Gavin Long fired at him, and the bullet went all the way through the sign and was sticking in the side closest to that operator. But that operator cut him down, and there were 2 guys there that initially contacted him. But what was so cool about that is that it was like a training day to listen to what the other operators did. They were communicating in gunfire, in live fire, just like a training day. Everything came together that day. They were talking about where they were moving to and who was covering what. In the midst of this gunfight, you can hear, moving and covering just like we had practiced. And they set up a battle line and they engaged Gavin Long and stopped that threat. This was a result of this was the end of our protest here. This guy, I'll remember it really well. It was a Sunday, and I'd walked outside the office, and I took a big breath of air and said, "Man, it's over. I'm so glad it's over. We came through this pretty good." And then it came across the radio that officers were down, and quickly our officers responded, and they responded so well. Two things happened that day. I looked at the team, and I realized, I said, "Man, these guys are there. It's time for me to step down, and my cup's full." If you know this, Tim.
Yeah.
Over the years, you just keep getting more and more added to your cup. Well, that day overflowed my cup.
Transition of power to people that you thought were more than capable and had proven themselves in battle.
Absolutely. So it was a good day for me. That was my last command, and it was a good time for me to step down from the team. And I stepped down knowing that it's in really good hands.
And for those listeners who may be from different areas of the country, we're referring to the 2016 shooting where some of our officers at BRPD and EBR Sheriff Department were tragically killed. There was a lot of heroes there that day, and some of them didn't make it. I'm not overly impressed as a cop. Stories, we hear tons of stories, and we're around a lot of people, a lot of alphas. And just to make a quick joke, every time SWAT would show up on the scene and I would see some of the commanders, I would always like to tell them how warm and fuzzy I felt and how safe and secure I felt. And, they knew I was just being a smart ass, which I was, but I understood that, they had a job to do and that they were really good at their job. And before we leave, I want to tell one funny story about full-time SWAT. When the department decided to go with full-time SWAT, I was really happy. I was on day shift, and it gave us a different level of competency as far as people out in the field to help out in situations. And I made a traffic stop, had 4 subjects in the car. One of them tried to get out. I was able to pin him to the car. I had him all at gunpoint. He threw a bag of crack cocaine under the car. At this time, it was 1:04, although I did have my weapon out. I looked up, and all of a sudden, the Super 6 showed up. That was the full-time SWAT guys. That was a little nickname or acronym or moniker that they were given. So we were able to, as a unit, make the arrest. I'm not sure the outcome of the case. I don't remember the details of it. It's been many years ago. But when I wrote my report, I referred to them as the Super 6. My lieutenant called me about an hour later and said, "Hey, what is Super 6? What the fuck is that?" And Jerry Bloom was my lieutenant. And I said, "That's the full-time SWAT guys. That's the little acronym we have for them, Super 6. He said, "You can't put that in a report." And I said, "Well, they need an identity, man. They, like the Super Friends, they have Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, and Robin, the Flash. We got the Super 6 in Baton Rouge. They need to have that distinction." And he said, "Okay, no, take it out." So I took it out, even though I was hesitant about it. I figured he wanted that out for a reason. So they stayed the Super 6 and eventually morphed into the Divine 9. And the rest is history. They have full-time SWAT elements still out there. Kudos for BRPD for having them available to us. Thank you, subject matter expert Ricky Arnett. I want to thank you for your time, and thanks for participating in this podcast. And I hope y'all found it as intriguing as I did. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Big Head on the Block. I'm Tim Henderson, the host. I look forward to dropping another podcast soon. Please give us any comments, likes, dislikes, or any topics y'all would like to discuss. Thank you.